This begins the second project, which is called the T block. There will also be an ECO at the end of the lesson. I'm going to scroll down here to take a look at the drawings and see what the dimensions are. Now, what we want to do in the very beginning, as usual, is we want to set our working directory. And in this case, I've got my directories already established, and this one is going to be the T block. If you're at a school, you probably have a directory system that's been assigned to you, and you'll have to ask your instructor whether or not you're going to need to change directories or select a different directory rather than the default one. Next thing that we want to do is we want to start our project. So it's going to be a new one. I will just call it, and I'm going to put my initials in here. The naming system you can get from your instructor or come up with on your own. Don't put any spaces. This is a Unix-based system, so you can't put any spaces in the names or special characters. We'll use the default template. It's going to be a solid. Click OK, or middle mouse button. Now I like to turn on all my datum tags. We've done this before. So at the View tab, you're going to have these three items. The planes, the axes, and the points have been turned off. So I'm going to turn these back on so we can see them. You can also see them over here in the model tree. And in the model tree, depending on how your system has been set up, the default is to leave all of these items off. I like to turn them on. But in industry, you have very complicated 1,000 part, 10,000 part, 100,000 part projects, and you don't want these all on. So it'll depend on what you're working on. For our purpose, I like to always have them on. So we see we've got our name here. If you don't like your name, you can always change this. After you finished a project, though, if you do a drawing or do an assembly, don't change the name unless all of those are open, or at least open and in session. In other words, open a file and then you can close the window. That's in session. All right, so if we look at our project here, we have a little bit more complex than the first one. And again, we want to do just what's in the very beginning here. We don't want to do a cut and a solid. So this T slot on the bottom, we're going to wait for the second step. Now, I have this file. And I've got some of it's actually been, I'm going to save it like this. I had some of it rolled back. I had taken my insert here and moved it up in the model tree. And you can see it rolls back to the model as if it's at a different historical position in creation. So you can insert a feature at any point, depending on, of course, what the references are going to be for that feature. So while we're here, let's do our model player. So we go to the Tools tab, Model Player, and we'll roll back the model to the very beginning. And you can see that the standard items are going to come up first, which are datum planes and coordinate system. And then we have our first feature. You can see the dimensions on this. This is in inches. And we have a cut. And we have a datum plane that's been offset. We have another cut. Only one dimension, notice that. And we have another cut. And again, only one dimension. Back in standard orientation here. So basically we have two windows that are available to us. Click on Windows and you can see we can go back and forth between the one we're starting to create and the one that's already been created. Now I'm going to go back over to the one that we were working on to start off with, and the reason is I want to show a few things just to make sure you remember to do them. We've got our part started, but we don't have anything prepared for it yet, so we want to prepare the files. We're going to go to our file, click on Prepare, select Model Properties, and you're going to change your material designation. You can practice with any of these. It's really not important in the very beginning which one you decide to pick. And remember, you can double click on it or right mouse button and you can go into properties. And remember, we've got all of these available, all of our choices. So we'll just keep it as this one. It has been assigned. That is the little red arrow here. Next, we want to look at our units. And again, it's in inches. That's the default. Some of you may have metric as a default. And we're going to leave that because inches is what the project is in. I'm going to close. And the other thing you want to look at is the model options. So File Options. And if we work down through the list here, we've got the environment. Save display with the model. So if you've got certain things set up with your display settings, you may want to turn this on, or if your layers have been set. System colors, we can actually change what the background looks like. We're going to leave it as white because when we capture this, it needs to be in white. And any of these can be opened up and you can see some of the changes here. Now, if you click on one of these and make a change, it will then affect other things, especially if you change the whole system colors. If we go to black on white, then what's going to happen, I'm going to come out of here and take a look at it, you'll see that the datum planes have changed color. So you don't necessarily want to do that in the very beginning until you've gotten used to it. So system colors, we'll go back to the default. Model display. Take a look at some of these. Shade very small surfaces. Very important to keep this on. Go down to the very bottom here. It looks like pretty much is set like we want to. This may have been turned off on yours, the show datums. You want to show the datums when you're rotating the model. I think that's very important. Shading, we'll go to very high and the tangent edges dimmed. Show smooth lines, show some pretty thick lines on the model, so we won't do that one. Tolerances we want to leave off for now. Let me go down here and see what else is there. So that's pretty much it for the display. We'll go to selection. And these are the things that are automatically going to be available for selection as a filter. You can remove some of them. Normally we leave this alone. In the sketcher, the only thing that's important here is the grid and the snap to grid. And they are different. Even if you have the grid on, it doesn't mean it's going to snap unless you check this. And in most of our projects, we leave it off. When we wrote the book in the very beginning, many years ago, 1994, we constantly used the grid. And every year since, we've gotten away from using the grid. Number of decimal places for dimensions. Let's kick this up to 3. And then assembly, data exchange, sheet metal, we don't care too much about those. So most of these are okay. Let's look at the model display again. We have trimetric and isometric or user defined. We're going to leave trimetric in the very beginning. The other thing is the shading, you might want to kick this up. Now if you've got a few hundred parts on your screen, you don't want to do this. So we'll set the quality higher. You'll slow down the system. We also have the configuration editor, and we'll get to this at another point. There's a lot of information in here and a lot of things that we can look at. Click OK. Now if you say yes, this is going to save it in that directory with the model for your setup. In our case, I'm just going to click on no. So we've set up our colors, our display, our edge, our sketcher. We've done a lot of different things. We set up our tree filters. So a lot of things need to be done in the very beginning before you start. Now this particular project is going to be sketched on DTM, or I should say datum front. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip over. I don't want to do all the project for you, but I'm going to skip over to the finished project. And remember, I can roll back my model, so I'm going to roll it back to the very first feature. So this feature, I can click on the model tree identifier here, the name, right mouse button, edit definition. It'll preview the model for me. I can roll in and out with my middle mouse button. And if I click right mouse button, edit internal sketch, it's the same thing as using these placement edit, but it's faster. I like right mouse button whenever possible. Now it's going to take me right back into the sketch, and I want to look at the sketch view here in 2D rather than 3D. And you can see we started to sketch at the origin here, one line chain, came around, etc. Now what you want to avoid doing until you understand this a little bit better is don't make any of these segments the same size. So for instance, I'm just going to sketch over here on the side here. As soon as something becomes equal, see the L? It means it's equal to the other one. So you can actually click your right mouse button and turn that off so it's not equal to the other one. So I'm going to go down, and I'm just going to create an odd little figure here, and I'm going to see, okay, here L1 equals L1, or I should say L equals L. So by accidentally making something equal, when we look at this here, we say L2, L1, and we have L1 over here, and we have L3 equals L3 equals L3. So the dimensions aren't going to show because they say these are all equal. So as you're sketching, be a little bit aware of that. If you accidentally get something you don't want, you just click on it, right mouse button, delete, or click on your delete key. And you can see that if you do that, it's going to give you some extra dimensions because now it's unconstrained in a certain area or in a certain direction. It needs a dimension. Before it was just saying this equals this equals this. So I'm going to undo those. Go back to this. I'm going to cancel this one out and go back to our view. You'll notice that we have these little alignment. That means this edge is equal to the top of this. And maybe we should go back there and look at our sketch one more time and see what happened here. So when I first sketched it, these were not equal. So let's say I delete that. You'll notice now I have a dimension here. So if I want to make those two things equal, I've got to tell the system they want to be coincident. So I'll pick this and the end point. And now it'll put the, I call them alignment. They've changed the name to coincident, even though it was alignment for many years. So I have a tendency to use some of the old terminology, and I'll try to remember to mention why I do that. So I'm going to cancel this one out, turn the model, and I'm going to cancel that so it doesn't change anything from the beginning. Now my second feature here is the cut on the bottom. So again, I'm going to click on that cut, edit the definition, and this is a remove material. I'm going to right mouse button, edit the internal sketch, and I'm going to click on my sketch view. So this is a fairly simple shape here, so T, but I started off with a center line. That center line allowed me to then make these items here symmetric. So as you're sketching, be aware of that. Put in your center line first. You're going to need a dimension to the center line eventually. And then when you want to start sketching, line chain. So for instance, I'll do it in here. You're going to notice I don't have a center line. Like so. But I could have put center line in first, might have been a good idea. And here's another thing. ProEngineer changed, or I should say, I'm sorry, Creo changed the name from center line to construction center line after the book was written. So we have our center line, but we still have L2, L2. So there's some, actually L1, L1, L2, L2, L3. Doesn't say that's equal, but they're vertical. So this is almost looking perfect like it is. I would have wanted the dimension going to my center line here from the reference. But in general, I tend to like to use symmetric. So I'm going to click on symmetric in the constraints. By the way, as you go through the projects, take a look at things. Sometimes once in a while you'll see something that's a drop down in this group, and there'll be other information and there are other choices that you might want to use. So symmetric, I'm going to click on my center line, and I'm going to click endpoint and endpoint. Now it's going to come back and it's going to say, hey, you've got a lot of constraints here. Do you really need all those constraints? And if I want to keep symmetric, I've got to get rid of one of the other ones. Let's see which one we'll get rid of. So now the little symmetric symbol comes in here. So if it's constrained correctly, you don't have to do the symmetrical, but it does, I think, kind of lend a little bit of strength to your model as you're preparing the dimensioning scheme. And again, it's not that important if it's not needed. In this case here, you can see we've got symmetric, symmetric, and symmetric. And here we only have symmetric on the top. But these other constraints take the place of that. I'm going to cancel that one. And there's my cut. So I'm going to drag the next one down. Now basically all this was a datum plane that was offset. So originally you select an existing datum plane or surface, and under the model tab you have plane here. So pick datum plane, you can see it's going to be offset in this direction, and then you drag it to wherever you want. You can double click on the number right on the graphics screen, or you can enter the information that you need in the datum dialog. I'll cancel that one. So that's how we got DTM1. We're going to use that for referencing. The first extrude here, very interesting one, because when you double click on here, you're going to see you only have one dimension, and that's the symmetric distance here. That's all. So let's suppress that one and do it ourselves. So where do we want to sketch? We want to sketch on our new datum plane, and you can select the datum plane in the model tree. Let's go and click on extrude and go into the sketch view. Now we want to put only one line from here to here, but we don't have any references. So I'm going to rotate the model a little bit, right mouse button, references, and I want this as a reference, this is a reference, and this is a reference. And you'll notice what happens is it's going to give you these references. And right while we're here, we could right mouse button, line chain, and go from corner to corner. So no dimensions are used because the references established where this is going to be. Right mouse button, OK. And this is important. Which way do you want to cut? We want to have a symmetric cut. And I forgot to click on remove material, so you can see wherever you want the material removed. And of course, watch which way the arrows are pointing. Pointing in the wrong direction, they're going to fail. Feature will fail. And there's our cut. And I didn't give it a specific size, but I could double click on it. Let me see if I can get the dimension. Double click on the dimension and then whatever it's supposed to be. Let's go 1.5. Left mouse button, middle mouse button, left mouse button, and then it'll regenerate automatically. So that's our cut. I'm going to delete that one. Second cut in that direction. Very similar. Basically, I'm going to edit the definition of that one so we can see. We're still referencing this DTM1. Right mouse button, edit internal sketch, and we'll go into the sketch view again. I'm looking in the other direction, but you'll notice that there's no dimensions for the depth or from the distance from the sides. It's symmetric about See these little marks here? These are symmetric. So the constraints are showing. Only one dimension was necessary. And the most important thing was identifying the references. So there is a reference along the top and one at the bottom. So references here, you can see that those have been selected. We have the top edge, and we have the whole surface over here. So I actually rotated the model and selected this as the reference. Then used a rectangle, and the rectangle will give you your symmetry easier. I'll cancel that one. So this project really doesn't end here. The project also needs to have a ECO. This cut here is going to change an ECO. And the ECO dimensions are given to you. It's going to require you to change some things in your model. So we want to go back to our first cut here, edit the definition of that cut. This is how you'll actually do it. Right mouse button, edit internal sketch, sketch view, and you're going to have to delete. Click on it, right mouse button, delete, and resketch the section. In this case, I won't worry about the actual dimensions, the sizes, but I will put in the dimension scheme correctly, or at least in one case. And if you look over here, you've got to use these dimensions. So I'm going to come from here up to this point, and from here up to this point. Oh, didn't get it. Dimension still selected. Reference to point, middle mouse button, and we've established the new cut. There's the direction it's going to be removing material. And we'll finish it. Now, one of the problems is we didn't bother to look at the view that's from the end, and we're going to notice that it's not down the middle anymore. It's actually 1.5 inches in. So in other words, when we offset this datum plane 1.5, all right, that's correct. But if we look at here, it's 4 inches for the depth. So if I double click on the whole model, double click on the dimension, middle mouse button. If you can't get it to work, click on regenerate. So you can see the dimension for the offset datum was okay, but the actual part got wider. And let's check and see what this dimension is. That's 1 inch. So these have been changed, but the thing that is new also is on the bottom here, the T-slot is going to change in configuration a little bit. So you want to make sure you take a look at these dimensions. So we have 2 and 4. So let's go in here and look at this. Click on it, edit definition, right mouse button, internal sketch, sketch view. By the way, I'm going to come out of there and show you a different way to get into this. You always click on placement, edit, instead of right mouse button, internal sketch. Also, instead of hitting sketch view, right mouse button, orientation, horizontal reference. So let's use the top datum as the horizontal reference. No, didn't give it to me. Select, how about select vertical reference? What would that give us? Interesting. And I go into sketch view and it turned it over. So it really doesn't make any difference where how we look at it, whether it's from the front, top, back, bottom, as long as we can get at the section that we want to change, the dimensions. And here we've got some different sizes. Obviously this one is 4, and we've got a few other changes that need to be made. You want to make sure that when you're doing this, it's positioned correctly, because the dimension scheme here says it's got to be from the end over to the slot. So this one had a dimension to the center line. So I'll go back into my sketch view, and if you don't like that, flip sketch orientation. So we have a dimension up here, this, oh, I get it, I'll get it, 2.50, and I'm just going to delete that. Still going to put in another dimension to locate it, but we don't care about it. This is that one over on the side here. What we want to do is establish a new dimension, right mouse button dimension, and go from the edge over to the new reference, which is the lower portion of the T-slot. So now we've located that. Some of these things we know are going to be bigger. Some of them are going to change configuration. In this case here, it's just changing its locating. That's all. In other words, how do we locate it? And we can see here, we can bring this one out, and we can bring this one out. So we can start making our edits here, but the first thing we had to do is change how we were locating it in the first place. It's still going to be symmetrical, so we can use that. And we can pull things apart, push them back together. I think this is almost 4 inches. And I think these other ones are like almost an inch or something. So again, you can do this physically, and then after you get close to your design, double click on it and change it to the specific one that you want, exactly what you like. So I'm going to cancel that and go back to our model. Now at the very end of your projects, you're going to click File, and you can save as and save excuse me, a copy or save a backup. A backup, you're going to put this in a new folder, and it'll have the same name. If you save a copy, you must change the name. If you just save, I'm going to click on Save, you're going to see you can't change anything here. You're just saving that file with that name. You go File, Save As, save a copy. Here you must change the name. I'll just type in anything. And on the type, you can go down and select what you want to save it as. Let's say you want to save it as a 3D PDF. You can do that. It'll give you some choices here. Takes a little while to generate it. I do have Adobe Pro 9.0 Pro on my system, but you still can do this with regular Adobe, or change those, or you can create this and do it in a viewer. I'll click here. Seems a little small. I'm going to double click on the model in the Adobe file and click on Home. See some of the other choices that I have here. My middle mouse button for moving it. Actually, any mouse button seems to work for that. My left mouse button, though, is for my spin. And you can change a lot of things here. You can change how it looks, how it's displayed. You can even change lights. You can actually even cut a section. In this case here, it's the wrong properties. Let's do it x-axis. So you see, you can actually make some changes here and show your sections. Actually, I want to get rid of this. I'll click on Home, and we're back to where we were. I'm not going to save this one. Remember, when the very end, always go into the view that you want. In this case, usually it's the standard view, and save it at this point. This concludes the T-block project.